Welcome back to another episode of Barely Legal and Web3. Today's guest is making supply and demand look cool again. Welcome to the show, Head of Tokenomics of Animoca Brands, Mo Ezeldin. Mo, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, and I'm glad you could make it. I mean, we were just chatting before. You're from London, and now you're here in Dubai.
I am. Sun, heat, what can I say? It beats the greatness in London right now. It is great to be here, and I'm excited for today's conversation.
For sure. And, you know, I mean, part of what is so interesting about your background, this tokenomics, and most people really don't even understand what tokenomics is. So could you talk to us a little bit about tokenomics and your role at Animoca Brands?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm still figuring out what tokenomics is myself some of the time. But no, all jokes aside, I mean, if we decompose the word, it's token and economics. And as you said, it's supply and demand, it's behavioral economics, but it's fundamentally the different layers within an ecosystem. And what we've seen within the Web3 or the crypto space is there's a lot of personas, and I'll be referring to personas a lot because I feel different people wear different hats within the industry. But there's a main persona, at least on the retail level, that they're just after return on investment, ROI. How can I turn X into 10X into 100X? And it's given the space a bad name because there's been nefarious activities within there. But I guess to bring it back to tokenomics, it's one of the core layers, especially when we're looking at token economies, is how can we design an ecosystem that's sustainable, but also something that can scale. So the initial stakeholders or personas within that, we look at the different interactions between them and where that supply and demand can come from. What that looks like is the pie chart that everyone sees, the allocations, the vesting schedules, which is the first part of tokenomics, but it's only a drip in the ocean. Or I have 2 young kids, so I'm going to take a Shrek quote. And it's tokenomics is like an onion, and there are many different layers, and that's one of the layers that are there. But fundamentally, a lot of the work that we do is focused on the 0 to 1. So it's sorting out the initial supply, where the demand will come from. But then also we have a Web2, in some instances, Web2 businesses, and then trying to leverage digital assets in Web3. And there's a big disparity between people who want to play games, for example, versus people who want to hold digital assets. So how do you design for an economy where you have very different personas within that? So there are some exact sciences, so to speak, and then the rest of it is more of an art from that aspect.
That's so interesting. I mean, and you talk about exact science, and I think that really is what it is. It's a science of it. It's an art and a science. I have a background in economics as well, and I saw you actually have math and statistics in your background.
Yes, I have 2 degrees in mathematics, and I've also very big in I have a degree in education as well. So I guess a bit on my background is that went into finance, quit within the 2nd week because I couldn't find the ethos alignment. So it's like, what do I do? And I thoroughly enjoyed adding value. Education seemed to be a natural pull, and that was my calling for a long time until I discovered crypto.
Yeah.
And then I made and lost a lot of money in 2017, 2018. And being a teacher, you're always taught to reflect on your practice. So I applied that reflection, and it's like, all right, why have I lost this money outside of the scams that were in the space? Which isn't a bad reflection of the technology, it was just a bad reflection of the actors in the space and the lack of regulation. We're getting better, but at least at that point in time, I mean, ICOs were the biggest thing in crypto back then. But upon reflecting, it was some of these businesses has raised money and they were still generating revenue or building at the very least in the Web2 or the conventional sense. Well, the token price was down 99%, and I couldn't wrap my head around why. And that's when I discovered there was a lack of this token economics or tokenomics in the space. So as any curious problem solver, I went down the rabbit hole and re-emerged maybe 9 to 12 months later with what I thought was a much better understanding of tokenomics. And just started dabbling within that layer of crypto economics, so to speak. And then fast forward to 2021, I was on Animoca Brands' radar, had really constructive conversations with the chairman and co-founder, and I was offered the opportunity to come in and lead the tokenomics department. I founded the tokenomics department, which looking back has been an amazing journey with lots of learning, and we're still learning. But in the maths background, it really gives us perspective on like the theoretical side of things, so hypothesis testing or coming up with a hypothesis and then testing that. Given the nature of blockchain, when you put something on chain, you cannot take it back. So it's also being very careful with what the initial hypothesis is versus the data that's out there versus what we can actually do. And we're still in a mode of advancing the technology that's there. I think we're in a much stronger position, at least technologically, from where we were 3 or 4 years ago.
You know, Mo, talking to you is like a breath of fresh air because, no, really. And I really think that, you know, those who are not in Web3 really need to hear this type of conversation. When you talk about things like the scientific method, you talk about data, using data with results, you talk about personas in an economy. This is sort of the precision and sort of the exactness that I think a lot of people who are not in Web3, and when I say in Web3, I mean like, you know, the people who are on Twitter quite a bit, using, you know, talking about which token's going up and which token's going down. They need to hear, they need to understand. And, you know, I wonder if that is purely because of your background and the focus on education and sort of this desire to go back to the scientific method. And do you see sort of a trend for other companies to start to really get back to the basics of why do certain things work? Why do certain things not work?
It's a very interesting question. I think for a lot of companies, especially when we talk about first-time founders, there is a catch-22. Do I build something sustainable and maybe miss out on the narrative at the time where I can raise a lot of funds? Or do I raise a lot of funds and then worry about everything else later on? So there is some friction there. But then I also feel, because it's quite money-oriented, that tends to be the core driver. And for better or for worse, we still haven't moved away from that. Obviously, with us, the focus is on building something sustainable. So at Animoca Brands, our ethos really is building blue ocean, building together, where you have ownership of your digital property rights, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And again, I can keep going with what we stand for. But in doing so, that's where the data aspect becomes so important. But what we also know is that the data points haven't been very clean over the last few years. And there are lots of different complexities to take into account. And with any data model, rubbish in, rubbish out. So it's also being careful and cognizant that some of the modeling that's there more often than not is wrong. But what we've seen over the past maybe 12 to 18 months, especially in the bear market, let's say, where it's been full of builders and that speculative layer hasn't been there in the same way it's been when there's been a lot of excitement and the price action has been going in the right way. So there are cleaner data points now. The technology is in a better place where we can actually be making more informed decisions, where before maybe that wasn't the case. So I think we're not there yet. We're definitely not there yet, but we're getting a step closer every time. And as we start to build more sustainable layers that are in there, as we tie in the revenue side or the Web2 side with the tech side, it makes more sense. And I guess I'll go on a very quick tangent. Yeah. And we all use the internet. How many of us actually know how the internet works? Not many. Yet with crypto, with Web3, we've been selling the technology side of things. The majority of users out there do not care about the back end. You don't download Instagram because it's built in JavaScript or C++. No, you download
That's for sure.
You download Instagram because it's trendy. That's where the network effects are. I mean, I remember this is something I use in conferences all the time. WhatsApp, I think a few years back, was brought out by Facebook, Meta. And there was a big furore in the crypto scene. Our data is not safe, download Signal, download Telegram. The majority of people in Web3 still use WhatsApp, even though they know their data is not safe. Why? Because that's what the network effects are. Why will I be in a different ecosystem or on a different platform if no one else is there? It doesn't make sense. So I think there are other aspects we have to take into account as well. And as an industry, we're not there yet, I don't feel. So it's just changing the positioning. And I guess like ChatGPT is an excellent example where it's a seamless front end. There's a free version, there's a paid version, and that's it. And all I really need to focus on is my prompt engineering, how good my prompts are to get the results that I need. It's as easy as that. No one understands how the LLM works in the back end. People don't care. They just care, how can I come in and use something? And I think that's becoming more of a realization within the industry as well.